I see a couple of fellow Binghamton folks gathering here. It's good to see y'all. And Jevlin snuck in there as well. There's a little sign-in sheet in the chat. There's another Christine. Maybe I'll just wait a minute. Let's see if we got other people in so I don't post it 7 more times. Christine, thanks for coming on in. There's a sign-in link for you as well. Just try to find an empty spot in there and fill in some of your information. We're filling in just the blue section right now. We're not going to worry about the yellow part. Come back to that later.
I'm legit stuck on what is the one thing you need to get done?
It's not the one thing. Just right. Identify a thing. Anything that's got to get done. It could be simple. It could be you got to do some laundry, or I don't know. Just one thing you got to get done. That's all we're looking for. Katie, welcome on in. There's a link for you to come sign in along with everybody else. And if you can't like identify the perfect thing to put in there, don't stress about it too much. This is we're mostly just trying to get you familiar with something I'll be talking about today. And the other bonus to this, in my opinion, is that now we're going to have a whole bunch of emails there. So you're sort of passively networking with each other as we speak, which is something I feel like is missing in our virtual conference world these days.
Yes.
Okay, we got one person that says pure silence for what you listen to. Oddly enough, I get a lot of my students when we're doing this will say silent, and I find that a little bit surprising. But apparently we're here with a bunch of people that like to listen to stuff while you're working. All right, so we're about 5 minutes into the session. I'm assuming most people that want to be here are here, and there may be another couple of folks that trickle in down the road, but let's go ahead and kind of get things started a little bit. First of all, welcome. I am simultaneously your announcer, room operator, and the presenter today. So if you have any questions about anything related to the tech of what we're doing, let me know, and I'll be happy to stop and give you some guidance. This is also kind of a little bit of an experimental tech session. As you can see, I've got this kind of interesting video feed that you're probably not used to seeing. It's because I'm using an additional bit of software in the background, something called OBS, which I think it stands for Open Broadcast Software, or something like that. And that's because I like to do some of these kind of things on another platform called Twitch, if you're unfamiliar with it. It's basically a platform that got started for people to stream video game content. It was real big in the esports arena. But there's a lot more people these days that are getting on there and doing educational content. And so I myself stream the process of making some art on there. And the art that I make is inspired by Taoist thought, which is part of the inspiration behind running this event and this activity. But it's in addition to like doing the streaming, it has given me kind of access to this world of like online tech, video stuff and microphones and things like that have been oddly useful under COVID situation. And I had no idea as I was getting into it that it was going to be something that I wound up using all the time. So I'm glad I kind of made that investment ahead of time. Um, I will also be sharing my screen when we get into a presentation in just a second. But to give you a little bit of an idea of what it is I've been having you do with this sign-in sheet, um, I'm going to be talking both about Taoism in general, as you know, and I think some of the lessons that we can get as leaders or potential leaders in higher ed. But I'm also going to be using this as a chance to kind of share with you something that has been particularly effective for us in our program in working with our students. And so I think this will be a great way to give you that firsthand experience of how it works, so that if you decide you want to try to take it and run with it, be my guest. Like, go ahead and spread this far and wide, because it's been really great. Um, and I will get into some more details about that in just a second. But this kind of sign-in process, setting some ground rules, is all a part of it. So the other part of that ground rules is normally, as I'm running this event, we sort of establish that I would ideally like you to have your cameras on, as long as you're reasonably comfortable with that. Um, I would ask you to have your microphones muted unless you want to, come and make a specific comment in the moment, ask a question, something like that, and you're free to interrupt me as we go. But just if you're sitting there watching, if you're sitting there listening, I just recommend having your microphone off so we don't get any of that background noise that might be going on. And lastly, and this is perhaps the most important thing, put aside all of those distractions. So if you got a phone right next to you or on your lap or on your desk or something like that, turn it off. Maybe you don't have to go all the way to turning it off, but like you can put it in do not disturb or something like that. You'll survive for the 30, 40 minutes that we got here, and I believe in you. Um, I'm pretty sure we're not going to witness your death on camera as a result of this. But I would recommend turning your phone off or sticking it in do not disturb. I recommend minimizing other windows, things like that. Just trying to get out of that multitasking attitude can really wear us pretty thin in a hurry. Granted, I know some of you, maybe you've got some legit work to be doing. I forgive you, but these are my recommendations. Um, so let's go ahead and get into the presentation itself. First, I just want to double check that you can see my screen. All right, got some head nods. And I would also recommend, if you are looking at my screen as well, that you may want to add like the participants in today's presentation. You might want to set that up into gallery view and have that open as well. There's just something nice about like getting to see other people that are here and focused on what it is we're here to do. Let me go back to the beginning so I don't ruin that surprise. All right. So first of all, this is the presentation called the Tao of Higher Education. And I just kind of am curious, with a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Taoism? Or the term even. I got 1, 2, we got a couple of thumbs up from our cameraless folks. Okay. So if you are pretty well familiar, like if you've been looking at this quite a bit in your own lives, or you've had a lot of experience with it, I'm going to toss it out there that you're probably more familiar with it than I am, but we'll get to that in a second. The first question to kind of answer preemptively here is, hey, that looks like a T. Why are you saying Taoism? It's because of translation stuff, and the pronunciation of Chinese characters and things like that don't map perfectly into English. So the older way that it was written was with T, and the newer way that it's written is with a D, and it's pronounced Dao. And it's something kind of vaguely reminiscent of either of those, but you'll see it written both ways. I just decided to go with the old one because it seems to be a little bit more recognizable for the average person. But more often than not, people will use the with a D anymore these days. I've got 3 major takeaways that I want to get to today, but I also recognize that I've got kind of a monster presentation here, so we might only get through 2 of them. So just bear with me, but these are the main things that I'm looking at trying to help you leave with if you get nothing else out of this. these are the three big lessons I'm going to give you. First off is I really want you to start believing that you should be studying your conditions whenever possible, because that gives you the best insight in what to do next. I want to leave you with this idea that balance does not mean stasis. You can kind of imagine somebody being perfectly still and they appear to be balanced, but the kind of the Taoist wisdom does not want you to be just a rock sitting there nice and evenly balanced. It wants you to kind of flow between states in a balanced fashion, so there's movement to it. And the last thing is some wisdom about how to lead like a Taoist sage might. And we can get a lot of wisdom from that out of the text that we're talking about today. So next, why should you listen to me? And honestly, you shouldn't. Thank you for coming. That's been my talk. We'll see you for the next plenary session. Have a good day. No, so um, I do really want to impress on you that like I've been curious about and I've been exploring Taoism pretty regularly, like kind of on a daily basis. I've been reading stuff and kind of digging into it and wrestling with it and all that stuff, but only for about the past year. Um, I don't have any kind of formal practice or training. Like I haven't gone to a Taoist retreat or a monastery or a temple or any of that kind of stuff. So if you're coming here expecting me to be this like amazing expert on a topic, that's not so much the case. Mostly I'm just kind of passing along the wisdom that I've managed to distill over the past year and things that I've been actively trying to apply to my own life and how I work as well. So first, I want to give you a little bit of idea about the people that we're talking about. If you read into the abstract for this presentation at all, you know that I'm talking a little bit about two figures who wrote two pretty influential books. The first here is Lao Tzu, who wrote the Dao De Jing. And I've got my handy little Dao De Jing right here. It's not super big. There's 81 chapters, and each chapter is essentially just how well the camera's going to pick it up, but it's just a poem. And this particular version of the translation has a whole bunch of annotations here to kind of help describe a little bit of the cultural stuff that's happening that maybe we don't know here in the West. And Sun Tzu is probably pretty well known. I'd say most people are familiar with him, but he's the guy that wrote The Art of War. And The Art of War is kind of an interesting book because I think I first kind of learned about it and got interested in it back in high school when I was still that kind of edgy teen. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go learn about all this strategy and I'm going to be like awesome, like, you know, that kind of thing. And as I've actually kind of gotten into reading it, I am happy to kind of discover that the discussion in The Art of War about warfare is actually relatively minimal. He's actually a major proponent for avoiding war, avoiding conflict at all cost. And that runs constantly throughout The Art of War. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why this sort of famous treatise on war is about not going to war, which I think is kind of a fun little bit. The other thing that I like to talk about with this is the timeline, because I found this absolutely fascinating when I started looking into it, which is that these two people, Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu, were both, you know, around the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. And if you compare that with stuff that we might be more familiar with here in the West, people like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, they're not that far off. I also tossed in the Buddha and Pythagoras, as in the Pythagorean theorem in mathematics, just to give us kind of a comparative understanding of where these Chinese philosophers come from in the relative timeline to the Greek philosophy, which is most of what all of what we do is based on. You know, much of our laws, much of our religious foundation, much of our scientific foundation is based on Greek philosophy here in the West. And a lot of it is based on these folks in the East. Also, Kongzi, or we know him as Confucius, is also right there in the middle. And notice I said for Lao Tzu that it's the 6th to 4th century, or possibly. It's because it's a little bit ambiguous about whether Lao Tzu was an actual real person and when Lao Tzu existed, but there's an awful lot of stories about Lao Tzu and Kongzi having like talked with each other and kind of influenced each other. And so, yeah, there's a lot of great stuff here. And basically all of these Chinese figures are talking about the Tao. Confucius, we have kind of extrapolated into Confucianism. Lao Tzu is seen as kind of the father of Taoism, but Sun Tzu, it was just kind of an officer, and he still talks about this idea of the Tao. It's because for all of them, the Tao is an even earlier concept from a much longer period ago. And so these folks, like Lao Tzu, is about 2,500 years ago, if you want to think about that to us. And he is talking about the ancients and the sages and things like that that happened relative to him. So it's incredible how long this wisdom is kind of percolating through the cultures. For the first major topic that I wanted to touch on, as I said, was about studying your condition. And actually, before I get into that, I would like to turn on a short little timer here, and I'll explain the timer in a moment. All right, so hopefully you see on my screen, my presenter screen, there's a little timer ticking down. Don't worry about it. I'll explain it in a moment. So for studying your conditions, basically what I'm going to do is I don't have a whole lot of notes that you're going to need to like furiously scribble down. Mostly I'm going to list a bunch of quotes here, and those quotes are freely accessible online in a variety of places. There's a okay translation of The Art of War that is public domain. You can search up, no problem. And at the end of this, I can give you a link to a whole lot of translations of the Dao De Jing if you're interested in. But I'm going to tell you where they come from and what chapter it is. So if you want to go and look at the greater context, be my guest. So first off, those who understand others are intelligent, but those who understand themselves are enlightened. This comes from a chapter that's all about these little pairs of statements, which are fantastic. And I think it's a great way of giving us a little bit of perspective into like a lot of the focus of Taoism is about an internal focus. And so they're saying, yes, if you understand what's going on, if you understand other people, you're smart. But it takes an extra step to be able to understand yourself, because we're very capable of deluding ourselves and confusing ourselves, right? Get to my notes here. This is kind of the step one of studying conditions, is making sure you understand yourself, and for all of us as higher ed professionals, making sure you understand your students. And kind of together, those two things are going to be helpful for us in understanding the greater context and how we ought to be acting at any given moment. The next quote comes from The Art of War, chapter 4, and says, "Thus, lifting an autumn hair cannot be considered great strength. Seeing the sun and moon cannot be considered great acute vision. Hearing the sound of thunder cannot be considered having sensitive ears." This applies here because what it was trying to establish is that lots of people are capable of understanding things that are easy to understand. What we're talking about for this session and trying to instill in everybody is creating a little bit more of a critical understanding of things, taking a look at situations, at people, at trends, at all that kind of stuff in a way that other people are not looking at it. And this is much more complicated. So what he's saying is, if you can lift up a bunny, you're not very strong. Like, don't think so highly of your strength. If you can see the sun and moon, you don't have great vision, you're pretty typical, you're pretty average. But it takes some other kind of keen insight to be able to see other things and to demonstrate great strength. And the next one comes from The Art of War, chapter 6, and says, "Knowing the place and time of the coming battle, we may concentrate from the greatest distances in order to fight." And this is talking about basically anticipating what's happening by studying the conditions and figuring out what is about to happen and when it's about to happen. That gives you the greatest freedom to be able to plan your response to it. To kind of put this in a familiar context, most of us were pretty well blindsided by the approach of COVID, right? Speaking from my perspective and from a lot of the people I've talked to, it just sort of descended on us and we suddenly had to adapt ferociously, right? Some offices at our school were way better at adapting to it in a hurry because they kind of anticipated where things were going. And other offices, had a very rough transition and maybe didn't get themselves figured out until the summer or even toward the fall, just because they weren't really prepared for it and didn't necessarily know how to set up the system that they needed to do. But if you're able to kind of anticipate that a little bit better and keep a level head, so you're not worried about like, oh my God, what's going to happen? But you're thinking about like, okay, this is going to happen and how do I approach it? You're able to create solutions to a situation a little bit more quickly, a little bit more responsively. Um, the last quote I have for this particular section, um, I've broken this up because this is a little bit longer chapter. It says the highest rulers, people do not know they have them. Task accomplished, matter settled. The people all say, we did it naturally. One of the lines I omitted from this talks about like the second level under the highest rulers says people love them and adore them, like they're beloved. So I often think about that where like I've got people in my life that I'm like, oh my God, this person is amazing. I love them, how they lead, and I love how they approach things. This is fantastic. I would follow them anywhere. Um, but this is kind of a neat perspective where they're saying the highest rulers, you don't even know you have them. They kind of guide you and everything kind of happens without you understanding or even recognizing it. And then the last two lines there talk about that, where if you are leading somebody so effectively in this way, if you're in that position of like people don't know they have you, they will think that they did all the work themselves because of course they did. Like there's no reason they wouldn't have done the work. Um, Whereas that kind of benevolent ruler, the people that we love and admire, you think about them all the time and you can really see their influence on things. You don't necessarily take that credit for yourself. And we want to like avoid some of this because they go like further and further down where like you start despising your rulers and you start not having any trust in them. So it's not a matter of like they're actually not doing anything. It's just that you don't even know that they're doing things because of how effective they are. Taoism in general has a sense of what they call effortless action, which is like it has this idea of you do something so well that it appears as though you're not doing anything. The big example I think most of you might be familiar with are like people turn to figure skaters, right? They do these phenomenal jumps with all these spins and everything, and it looks like they're just gliding. But if you were to go and try it, you wouldn't be able to accomplish 10% of what they can do, and you'd probably fall and laugh and possibly hurt yourself and all that. Like there's an effortlessness to what they do because of their mastery, and that's what we're kind of shooting you. We're aiming you toward that effortlessness as a part of this. So now we're going to get to the timer. We're going to get to that sign-in sheet, all of this kind of build up and anticipation. This is a quick little case study of an activity that we started here at Binghamton back in the spring of 2018 was the first one. It's an event we put on called the Long Night Against Procrastination. The name choice is very deliberate because we didn't want people to be pulling all-nighters. We just want them to pull a long night, right? And you know, we have plenty of students that will put off things for a long, long time, and then it comes crunch time, and they get to their exams, and they stay up all night trying to crash study for that exam. And we do our workshops on time management, and we tell them all these things that I'm sure most of the rest of you are doing too. And then you get frustrated because none of them actually go and put it into practice, and then they come to your office and they complain about it, and you say, "I told you what to do," right? So what we actually did is we created a space to do it. So we're not just talking about time management. We're not giving them skills. We say, come on in. Here's 3 hours of dedicated work time. You're going to sit down. You're going to focus. You're going to listen to us. And we take a much heavier hand approach to it for this event. You know, all the rest of the time, we're all about the like challenge and support and all that stuff, which is great for like long-term development. But sometimes people just need a parent to sit down and say, all right, kid, here's what you're going to do for the next couple hours, right? And that's basically the approach that we're taking for this event. So what I've guided you through already for this presentation is I had you sign in, which is something very much like what we have our students do. Right now, we're doing this event virtually, and this is exactly how I run it. I have the students come in and sign in. I changed up the names on that sheet a little bit. So obviously, I'm asking you for a little bit more information about like your school and program. So that we can kind of do some of that networking. And also because we have had a few people come in and you probably don't know what I'm talking about. Let me open up the chat again quick and I'll send that link to you so you can take a look at it too. So we have them sign in. We have them fill out a little bit of information. The question about what are you listening to? That's just my personal thing. I like to see what people are into. I like hearing about the kind of music that you like, and then I usually also provide a column where people can leave a link, like if you have a YouTube video or something, to share it. I'm a big music person. I like almost everything and will tolerate just about everything. And so I'm curious to see what people do. And I think it's a good way to share something a little bit personal. It's almost like a mini icebreaker. Today, I'm asking you why you're here, basically. I see a bunch of people think that this is going to be interesting. I see a couple of ELI folks. Hello, welcome. Glad to have you in AEEE. And then also this question about what do you want to get done? Usually what I do for that is I'm asking people, what are you working on tonight as a part of the long night, as opposed to this a little bit more general for you guys. I opened it up a little bit to say, what's one thing that you have to work on? The last two columns are for the end of the event, or whenever somebody has to leave, right? I tell them to go back in and fill in those last two columns. So for today, I asked you to give me what your big takeaway is, and then how do you feel about the session, basically. For my students, when I'm running this, instead of the big takeaway, I'll ask them how much were they able to accomplish? What did they actually manage to get done? But I keep that question about how do you feel about it? Because I think forcing people to reflect a little bit on themselves and what the work they managed to accomplish, how they feel about it, and recognizing that almost always they feel really good because they feel like they were able to focus, they feel like they're able to concentrate, they feel like they've been accomplished because they managed to get a lot of things done. And that's what gets them to come back time and time again, is that recognition of how good that event made them feel. And they can see concretely what they were able to accomplish. So this is the whole reason I do this, and why I'm bringing this up in terms of studying conditions, is to give you a practical example, right? We take a look at our students who are saying, I'm burnt out, I have no time, I don't know how to study, I don't know what I'm doing. And we say, okay, you're going to come in during this time, you're going to get work done, and we're going to show you how to do it. And we're addressing all those comments. And rather than just necessarily giving them the tools and setting them off on their own, which can be really intimidating and overwhelming for students that already feel like they don't have enough time, we say, I got you. Just hold on. At the end of it all, we can say, and by the way, this is something you can do yourself, right? It's easy to put a timer on and just do it yourself. And now they understand what it is that they have to do. And so a lot of them are coming back over and over again. They're telling us that they're using it in their own time and things like that. And so it's about kind of taking a look at what that problem is and trying to redefine how do we approach what that problem is. And you'd be surprised how many of these people that are saying like, oh my God, I'm so burnt out. They come in and they do some amazing work and they feel great about it. Obviously, they're not so burnt out that they can't function because they're coming in and doing it. And I think providing that space to allow them to relax a little bit is a great way of approaching it. A couple other questions just to wrap this section up. This is another one from The Art of War, chapter 2. And this goes into a little bit more about how we can maybe apply this to you as kind of an office, and talking a little bit about the idea of trying to create connections. And we'll get into an activity here in a second. So again, if the campaign is protracted, the resources of the state will not be equal to the strain. There is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. So this is where I was talking about. Sun Tzu was looked very down on war, despite writing a treatise on war, right? This is chapter 2, like right out the gate. He says, don't do it. It's expensive. It's going to ruin you. It's bad. Like, stop. Don't go to war, right? And then the rest of it sort of is like, okay, but if you have to, like, here's some guidance on what you can do. The reason I bring this up in terms of studying conditions and trying to think about how you can try to apply this as potential leaders in your offices or as current leaders even, is thinking about the relationships that we have with other offices. Think about the relationships you have within your office with the people you work with, and thinking about how much time and energy might get consumed by conflict, basically. I'm not talking here about conflict resolution. I'm just talking about the idea of trying to avoid conflict and get around it ahead of time so you don't have to get to the point of resolving it in the first place. So we've got a quick little activity to try to show you. This is something, if you've got like a piece of paper or something nearby, a document that you can open up and jot down, is very, very quick and easy to do. And you can expand it to whoever, like interpersonally or between offices that you would like to do. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through it real quick. I've called it Complete Your Web, because this is kind of about this idea of checking in on your network and the relationships that you have with them, so we can try to observe them, try to study those conditions and figure out how you can influence that web in any way. Look for opportunities to modify your situation if you can. So I'm going to use myself as an example here. This is an example from a few years back. I'm identifying the financial aid office as the group that I want to talk about here. And for the quality of relationship, once you've identified someone, is I want you to put in either a -1, a 0, or a +1 in the next column. For the strength of relationship, you're going to put down a 1, a 2, or a 3. So what this means is if it's a -1, you have a negative relationship with this office or this person. If it's a +1, you have a positive relationship with this office or person. And if it's a 0, it's just sort of, it's a typical thing or maybe non-existent. As far as the strength goes, we want to gauge, okay, how strongly is that relationship embedded, right? So with a 2, like that's kind of a moderate strength. So what I'm trying to establish here is that, with the financial aid office, I feel like we had a moderately negative relationship with this office. Okay. Then the next important part is figuring out, what is your supporting evidence? Like, how do you know that this is the case? And you want to try to be specific. I'm being a little bit more vague than you should be here right now, just so you know. So what I'm trying to identify is that there was little trust with info, like the financial aid office didn't really trust us all that much. There's a very strong silo effect, right? The two offices were very independent and not really sharing much in the way of resources or information. And there's a high response time for requests, meaning we might need some information and they would take a long time to get it to us. And oftentimes it might not have been what we needed in the first place. So it's frustrating, right? I'm sure you all have similar kinds of relationships where you're like, it bothers me that I have to work with these people, but I have to, right? And again, you want to be more specific with this list. Like, try to identify very specific situations, specific occurrences that have happened that causes this. Like, even this stuff is a little bit vague. So try to point out, like, what was the thing that makes you think that they have little trust in you, that kind of thing. So fast forward a couple of years, we now have a pretty decent relationship with the financial aid office. And a lot of it came down to trying to identify, why did they not want to give out the information all that much? And one of the big reasons was that they were governed by a bunch of other regulations, and they really weren't able to give us access in the way that we needed to. And starting to negotiate, okay, why is this that you don't trust us with this stuff? So it didn't, like, we've gradually found out it's not a personal thing. It's not like they hated us for some reason. It's that they had a very legitimate reason why they couldn't do this. But through that communication, we were able to kind of come to some compromises about how that would work. In the meantime, I was, beating my head against the wall, being like, look, I'm willing to do all of this work for you guys. I know you're busy. Just give me the access to the information and I can do it myself. It's fine. But that was not something they could do. And so I was getting frustrated because from my perspective, I was like, I want to help you. I just want this information and I want to help you so that you don't have to do the work. But it didn't really work out that way. Eventually, we figured out a pretty good compromise. And now, a couple of years later, we've built that relationship into a much more positive thing, where I've got a contact over there that I can call up pretty easily and say, like, hey, okay, we're working on this report. Do you think we can do this and this and this? And now they're very open to it because they understand what it is what we're trying to do. But it's about kind of having that communication. The rest of this activity, this can apply to people, it can apply to offices, but this is a great way to take a look at, what does your network look like? And try to find some of these relationships that you want to improve on, and look for opportunities to try to improve those, because those will turn into opportunities for your students. And that's really the major important part at the end of the day for this. The second thing here, the second big point is balance is not stasis. I talked about this a moment ago. We want to talk a little bit about this idea of kind of flowing between states and not trying to reach just an even point. I think a lot of us dealing with COVID are like, man, I want this to be over. I want it to stop. I'm tired of this. And once it's over, what then? Like something else is going to come up, but we're going to have other things that are going to be challenging us no matter what. So understanding like how do we approach these situations and how do we kind of flow between them is really the key here. They use this idea of flow and water throughout Taoism in lots of different contexts because it's this fabulous metaphor. And the big thing is that it flows from the high places to low places. It avoids these difficult things, but at the same time, it is the most powerful thing. Like the flow of water is the most powerful thing, and it will cut through rock. Something that seems like a barrier, with enough time and persistence and just continuous flow, you will cut right through it. So here's a couple of new quotes for this section, just to kind of get us started. First off, this is from chapter 22 of the Dao De Jing. It says, "Yield and remain whole, bend and remain straight. Be low and become filled. Be worn out and become renewed." I just got the gong in my ear to let me know that our timer is up. So let me explain this real quick and I'll get to that timer. This is just to kind of set the stage about this flow. Basically, they have this idea that if you are the big, strong oak tree, a good strong wind will come over and knock you down. But if you are more like bamboo, that big tempest, the high winds are going to bend you and you'll be able to return back to normal. So we're talking about resiliency and trying to keep in mind that idea of balance is not rigidity, but it's this kind of flexibility, this ability to move back and forth so you can return to center. The timer going off is to let me know that we just finished a Pomodoro. This is what we do for our long night against procrastination. We run Pomodoro sessions, which are intense, focused bits of time, usually 25 minutes with a short break. I'm not going to do the break right now because I want to continue through the presentation. But what we would do is we take 5 minutes at this point to have a break. We tell people to get up, stretch your legs, go for a walk, get a snack, go to the bathroom, get a drink, all that kind of stuff. And the reason is not just to like control your time precisely, but there's actually a benefit to walking away from your work. Let your subconscious mind kind of work on the task at hand and allow it to process some of the stuff. You've been working on a difficult problem, you're working on a complex task. Go to the bathroom, let your mind just kind of work on it in the background. It's a great way of coming up with solutions that you don't even know you're coming up with. Also, just some activity, hydration, things like that are good for you. So to simulate this break, just everybody take a second, stretch up, get your arms up, take a deep breath. I see a couple of pleasant faces there enjoying the stretch. All right. So we would normally give you 5 minutes to kind of do something like that and encourage everybody to really get up and take advantage of it. We also do Pomodoros of 50 minutes as well to provide a little bit longer time because that 25 minutes goes fast. And people are almost always like, oh my God, that was 25 minutes. I've done nothing. So we'll throw in a 50-minute one here and there, and usually with a 10-minute break because sometimes people will want a little bit more time. All right, back to the presentation so we can keep this going relatively on track. I've got a couple of controversial statements I'd like to put out there. I at least think this is controversial in a higher ed setting. These are things that I think are tenets for a lot of people, and I hope that you won't come after me with pitchforks in a second. But here they are. Do not chase best practices, and do not buy into the self-care industry. I'm choosing my words carefully here because I don't want you to chase best practices. I want you to create them. This idea of flow, the idea of observing your conditions, the idea of creating stasis or creating balance rather than stasis is all about kind of anticipating things and about creating things and getting out there and doing what is necessary for the moment. I think the idea of coming and getting best practices is kind of inherently flawed if you're looking to be good at what you do, because somebody else has already beaten you to it, right? You are going to replicate what they have done, probably not do it exactly in the same way, quite possibly do it worse, maybe do it better. You'll have some kind of mutation to it to make it your own. But by the time you get that up and running, that person's moved on to the next thing that they're busy creating, right? You're always going to be following the best practices, and you always kind of keep yourself in this state of mediocrity. So best practices are good if you can find something that's really useful and you can implement it quickly. But if the time to implement that best practice was a month ago, you've missed the boat. Like, you want to be trying to look for what's happening now, what's relevant now, and what's coming down the line, so that you're prepared for it, and you can be the person up here in the presenter seat telling me what to do. Okay. And also, don't buy into the self-care industry. Cultivate a sense of care, cultivate self-care. The reason I use this specifically is I say the word industry. I think, like all good things in the US, we commoditize self-care. Um, an awful lot of the messaging of self-care out there is go take yourself to a spa, right? I'm sure like spas are great. You feel pretty good afterward, but you're spending money. You're helping somebody else line their pockets as a result of it. When there's a lot of things that you can do that are self-care that don't involve being a commodity. Um, and so you want to kind of be careful about this, because there's also an awful lot of things that are sold as care that are just distracting you from the things that you have to be able to get done, which is just going to continue to keep you in a state of stress and a continued state of dependency on that care. Right. I think when we talk about self-care, I, for one, am looking for things that get us out of that state of stress and get things to be finished, so that we can actually and legitimately relax rather than escape from what is causing the stress. Yeah, and I see a bunch of good comments here in the chat. I see Christina mentioned some stuff about using Pomodoro to send it just to me, but it's fantastic. If you haven't used it, happy to talk about it with you a little bit more later. And consumption, yeah, it doesn't equal care, right? So, I mean, you all just came from these self-care sessions, I hope, where you get a little bit of idea about some of these things that you can put into practice, and none of it costed money, right? Being able to communicate with people, to talk about how you're feeling about things, to be able to get your mind out of your head for a little bit, to be able to breathe, to be able to exercise, to get out into nature. All of these kind of things are excellent, and they don't require you to go spend money on some product. Yeah, there's nothing to escape from, right? That's the idea. And so I think that those are really strongly related to this, because we want to build a sense of resiliency. And the idea behind this particular activity, that this Pomodoro session, is honestly, it comes from one of my students who, as they were graduating, they were interviewed by one of the colleges here at, kind of to leave a announcement at the end. And they said sometimes self-care is doing the work. Right? It's getting your work done. This student had a 4.0 almost every semester they were there, and they were talking about self-care and really, really invested in the idea of, speaking your truths and finding opportunities to relax. But man, she studied a lot. She studied hard. She got her work done. She wasn't putting things off. And that's a major part, does a lot to help us relax at the end of the day. Is if you're not stressed, if you don't carry the weight of these things that are bothering you, then you don't need to kind of unwind from them so much. So the idea behind this activity that we're doing is create an environment where people get that stuff done instead of leaving it for another day and continuing that anxiety day after day after day after day, feeling like they have to get away from it. The next quote I prematurely tossed up on screen. Therefore, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. The four seasons make way for each other in turn. There are short days and long. The moon has its periods of waning and waxing. This idea of a cyclical nature of things comes up over and over and over again throughout Taoism, and I think that it goes pretty strongly. Most of us are probably familiar with it on an academic calendar. We've got these intense periods of activity at the beginning of an academic year, and then we might get a little bit of a breather during some of the other times. I know I am looking forward to winter, which is my lowest period throughout the year, and I'm excited. And I also am always amused when students are asking if we have summer plans, and I'm like, I'm running a summer program. This is probably the busiest time for me, so thank you for playing. But it's kind of important, recognizing those cycles, understanding that cycles are coming up again, those busy times are coming, and it's a good idea to try to prepare now if we have the time and the ability to prepare for it, which will relieve us of our stress and anxiety in the moment. You're always going to face that stress and anxiety when it's busy, right? But if you're prepared for it, you're going to be a little bit more easy going during the moment. We at our office have a love relationship with the MBTI, and we talk a lot about personality types. Most of us are P types, which for the uninitiated among you refers a lot to the ability to be kind of spontaneous and kind of more of this kind of go with the flow attitude. And we're very good at dealing with the situation in the moment, less good about planning for it. So this is something we have to work on a lot. And we value very highly those of us in our office that are those planners, the long-term folks that keep us on track so we don't have to scramble in the moment. And they rely on us in the moment when things are going wrong. So it works out. It's good balance. So what this can look like for you as an institution, as an office, and as an individual. One example for the institution that I've noticed throughout my career and even while I was a student is this constant tug of war between centralizing services and decentralizing services. This is a back and forth kind of thing. People are constantly saying, okay, we want to get our offices out there to where the students are, meet them. That'll be great. And eventually, we get some feedback and they're saying, oh, wait, no. Students are too confused. They have too many different places to go. We need to rein it back in. And so it's this constant kind of rubber banding between centralizing and decentralizing. And I think the answer is to keep doing that rubber band, because if you stick to one of them, you're always going to have the flaws of that particular system present. It's not a perfect solution. And so by constantly investing your energy, kind of going back and forth between them, you're going to constantly be shifting the focus and providing what people need, and reinvigorating the students that you're working with. As an office, this can look like outreach, active outreach. Go in and do that hard, tedious work of emailing or texting or whatever your individuals on an individual basis, doing a lot of work, getting out there and getting to them. But that's draining for us as well. So also providing that intake space, allow students the space to come in and be present and there for them. Again, this kind of rubber banding back and forth. Do some outreach, back off. Do some outreach, back off. It's not about stasis. For you as a person, brainstorming, coming up with new stuff, but also the tried and true. Focus on the things that are tested. The vice president of student affairs at our university presented a fascinating statistic to us a couple semesters ago, where they were talking about this little pot of money that he had for funding some new ideas and things like that, little grant initiative. They said about 40% of the grants that were awarded to things that had already been awarded. These were stuff that had been going on already, and seemed to be producing some good stuff, and it was useful to keep a hold of. The other 60% of the grants were given to new programs, deliberately so, because we wanted to get some new energy, some new ideas. And this is really useful. This Pomodoro thing we've been doing, like I said, since spring of 2018, and the students absolutely love it. I get, when we were doing it in person, we'd get 50 people coming in pretty regularly. And even online, I'm still getting 30 or 40 people to show up to it. So that's going to be one of my tried and true things I'm holding on to as long as it's working. But I'm also the person in the office that's usually doing a lot of the ideating, coming up with new, strange things that no one else is thinking about. And most of them flop. But that's fine. As long as you create that kind of a balance between those two things and understand, like, okay, this is how much we want to dedicate to new stuff. And it's fine if it just unravels, because we'll scrap it and we'll make new stuff next time around. It's all good. Nothing in this world is softer or weaker than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and strong. This is what I said earlier about that river cutting through a mountain. We want you to be the river, right? We want you to have that flow and that persistence to get through the things that you're facing that are difficult, because that persistence eventually wears it down. And trying to keep a level head, trying not to be frustrated in the process, because you're water, you're flowing, right? You don't have to worry about running up against that wall, because you're going to try to get around it, or eventually you'll cut through it. That's the idea. For this last activity, I think this is all we're going to have time for. So I'm not going to get much to the third thing. I may just briefly mention it on our way out. But this is another quick thing you can do. And I will be making this available. I know people are always curious about slides and stuff. So this will be available. You can see all the activities. I can probably share my notes and everything as well. But here's a couple of quick ideas. first off, identify the problem that you want to be working on and figure out what is your evidence. Why is this a problem? How do you know it's a problem? Try to, again, this is kind of about that situational awareness. Try to understand your circumstances and identify as much as you can, as specifically as you can, because the specificity will help in a second. What is your idea for a solution? Try to get that out right away. Most of you are going to have some idea pretty quick, and then you'll have to think about it to figure out why that's going to work or not. And then a few kind of follow-up questions. What does that solution do to address the problem? This kind of helps you understand, like, okay, why am I putting forward this idea? What is necessary in order to achieve that solution? Because maybe all the pieces aren't there and you need to go and kind of construct a situation where that will be something you can do. And is it viable? Is that solution really going to work? Or is it something that you can do? Right? A lot of times we talk about how do we get more engagement in our offices? And the answer is, like, we need more people. we need a lot more people to work with everybody. It's not really viable because there just isn't people, there isn't resources. So we have to figure out other alternatives. And then you want to pick out a couple of those identified pieces of evidence back in step 1 and see if maybe you can redefine the problem in a unique way. And I've got a great example of this that comes from, I think it's from a book called Are Your Lights On? I'm not 100% on that, but I think that's where it came from. It sort of locked away in the back of my brain somewhere. The example was a company that had a problem where their elevators in the company were like, there's huge waiting lines to get into these elevators at the beginning and the end of the day. People are waiting around and they're losing time and all, people are frustrated, all that kind of stuff. And so the immediate solution is get more elevators, right? If people are waiting for elevators, we just get more elevators and there'll be less wait because there's more stuff going on. But there's a major problem with that. The elevators are built into the building and it's a major cost, right? There's a huge infrastructure investment for that to be a solution to the problem. In the end, a much simpler solution, stagger start times, stagger end times. If you have people coming in at 8:30 and 8 and 9 and whatever, then you don't have that big rush. Nobody's waiting for the elevator anymore. And you didn't invest a thing, right? You just stagger the time. But it requires you being flexible. It requires you thinking about this stuff and studying those conditions. The problem wasn't that there were not enough elevators. The problem is that people were waiting. So you find a way to keep people from waiting. A big similar kind of thing comes from like queuing theory in like England and at amusement parks and things like that, is this idea of like, hey, if you got to wait 3 hours to get on that ride at Disney, I'll at least make you walk through a long line with interesting stuff along the way so you're entertained and occupied. If you just had to wait in a line, oh, it'd be miserable, right? And so reconceptualizing what that problem is can go a long way to giving you new solutions to it. All right. Basically, we're just about done. And so the last thing I had in here was leading like a sage. So to highlight a couple of key words for you to take away on how to lead like a sage. I'll share with you some of these quotes, but the key word here is being effective. You want to use your resources in an effective way, and they're focusing on combined energy. So you're not relying on one person necessarily to do something, but use the talents of everybody that you have at your disposal. I can honestly say that for this conference, this very conference that we're in, it has been a joy working under Kivan because she has used us phenomenally well to organize it, really tapping into our strengths and keeping the energy up for us. She's been tremendously effective at that. The second one here is being humble. A lot of you are probably at least a little bit familiar with this, maybe through your own awareness of things like servant leadership. It carries with it an air of humility. And this is a great quote out of the Dao De Jing that talks about the idea of being humble. They say, all streams flow to the sea because it is lower than they are. Humility gives it its power. So if you can be humble, people will follow you. But it has to be, this is the key, it has to be genuine. It cannot be contrived. And that's another big theme throughout the Dao De Jing is you have to act without contrivance. So I will skip past this last activity, but I just threw in that last little thing at the end, talking about like giving you some ideas on how you can get some of your stuff done, how you can be an effective leader. And part of being an effective leader is being conscientious, doing the work that needs to be done when you say it's going to be done, being humble, and finding time to do that work, blocking out the time helps you get it done. Thanks everybody for being out here.